I'm Louis, and I'm going to make a sourdough starter, which is used to make sourdough bread. Sourdough bread is a really yummy bread, and it is very nutritious for you because it's made with wild yeasts, not the good old dried yeasts that we use nowadays. However, making sourdough is a slow bread making process, but it actually results in a really great, tasty loaf of bread that's really good for you and nutritious. Making a starter is relatively easy. All you need is stone ground wholemeal flour and water. However, these days, stone ground wholemeal flour can actually be quite difficult to get. I've been having quite a bit of trouble myself. So there are other starter recipes, which we'll be doing videos on, in which you don't have to use stone ground wholemeal flour, but you could either use plain flour that's unbleached, potatoes. These are just some of the recipes that I'll cover when making sourdough breads. Okay, these are the basic tools that I've been using. A digital scale to weigh the flour and water. I use a sugar thermometer. Obviously, I only use it up to 40 degrees Celsius. You can use other thermometers, or maybe even judge using your finger the temperature of the water. I use one of these glass Kilner jars, and I prefer to take off the spring and just use the top as it is. So you can take the spring by doing this, take that off. So this just rests nicely on top, loosely, and because the sourdough starter actually rises and expands, you don't want a tight seal, otherwise you might get an exploding jar. But this prevents that from happening. So don't have a tight seal on your jar, or alternative things you could use would be perhaps a food grade plastic container, a ceramic jar maybe, or bowl, things like that. And I use a stainless steel bowl to heat the water up in, because I don't have a saucepan. But generally a small saucepan is probably required. And a nice spatula to clean the sides with and to mix. So we're going to make the starter. And the starter is actually the leaven that is used to raise the bread. Okay, so we're going to make a starter. Oh, okay. So we're going to make the starter now. The starter is what we use to raise the bread, and bakers call it the starter, or a leaven, or levain, or actually that's it. If you don't have bottled water though, you can use tap water and dechlorinate your tap water though by boiling an amount of tap water for about 20 minutes and then letting it cool down. Once it's cooled down, you can then use the water in place of bottled water. That just tries to get rid of as much chlorine as possible from the tap water so that the chlorine in it doesn't kill off the wild yeasts. And yes, I'll show you how to dechlorinate water and use it for making a sourdough starter in another video. To make the starter, it takes about 4 to 5 days to make. That's because you're actually trying to grow the wild yeasts and the wonderful bacteria that will be used to raise your bread over that time. They don't grow overnight, unfortunately. So if you can't get hold of wholemeal bread flour or wholemeal flour, there are sourdough recipes where you can use plain flour, or potato and plain flour, and we'll be covering those in other videos. Okay, so now let's get some water. About 40 grams is what you'll need. And what we're going to do is we're going to heat this up to between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius. I'm using a sugar thermometer there. You don't need to use a sugar thermometer. And you don't need to use a steel bowl. You could use a saucepan. So just heat that up. Now, if you don't want to heat up the water, you actually don't really have to. As long as the water is perhaps around room temperature, that should be alright. It may actually make the starter take a little bit longer to get going. One of the reasons why we heat up the water is that it will heat up the flour that you're going to add to the mixture. And that will come to about 30 degrees or just under. And that's really about 28 degrees is the optimum temperature for getting the starter going and for the starter to enjoy its life as a starter. So yeah, we're having a look at the thermometer there. And now take it off and let it cool down if it's too hot. Down to about 30 to 40 degrees Celsius. Obviously it's a bit hot for me. And there you go. You can use your finger if you want. And do the ouch test. Now let's add 40 grams of flour to the starter. So we're going to measure it out. I'm using a Kilner jar there without the spring. Just place the lid on top. It's nice and safe. So 40 grams of wholemeal flour. We use wholemeal flour because it includes the grain on which the wild yeasts live. Using white flour, you might be able to get something started, but apparently it takes much longer. So you might have to wait a lot longer for it to see if any wild yeasts are still present in the white flour. And we shall add the water. It's now down to about 40 degrees. Add it in, and that'll mix it in very nicely. And then you can put it up into the boiler cupboard or somewhere, a nice place, a nice warm place. Boiler cupboard is preferable because the temperature in there usually gets to around 28 degrees, which is when the wild yeasts grow. So now it's all mixed. I'm going to put it in the boiler cupboard. Okay, now that we've mixed it together, put it into a warm place like your boiler cupboard for 1 day. Now you're taking the starter out and you can see that there are bubbles, which means the wild yeast is starting to grow. And what we're going to do again is put in 40 grams of water and 40 grams of flour. So we do the same as we did on day one. This method is different to other methods where sometimes you take out some of the starter and you put in extra flour and water. We use small amounts of flour and water to get it going. Because it uses less flour, so there's less wastage.
we put in the flour, 40 grams of flour. And heat up the water again. Now that we've heated up the water, we put it in and mix it all together. And then we're going to put it back in the boiler cupboard or a nice warm place. Usually right at the top of the cupboard, top of the shelf, can be a nice warm place because hot air rises. Okay, we can see that the starter on day 3 is now starting to work. It's got bubbles in there. It's looking good. It's going to smell quite interesting as well. Probably fruity, a little bit acidic. So we're going to put 40 grams of flour into there and 20 grams of water. This is to firm up the starter. So you can now mix the flour and water together as you did before, and then put back in a warm place. So we're going to use 100 grams of water this time, heat that up nicely. You could use a finger test if you want. And then we're using 120 grams of white flour. This is actually to lighten up the leaven a little bit. However, you can use wholemeal flour if you wish. And we mix in the water once it's heated, mix it all together nicely, and then put in the boiler cupboard and leave for another day. Now it's time to check the starter, see how it's going. You can see that there are bubbles, I think, and it will smell slightly acidic and should have risen slightly, or maybe appreciably in this case. It seems to be working, so we can make some bread.
Now that your starter's bubbly and looks to be alive and vigorous, it won't be so vigorous at the beginning, but it will get vigorous as you start to use it more. You can now bake some bread. In our next video, we'll show you how to make some bread. Bye, and good luck.